In April 2008, excitement coursed through the veins of a group of Elim Christian College students as they went on a thrilling adventure through New Zealand's stunning Mangatepopo Canyon. But what they didn't know was that a deadly combination of unpredictable weather and a series of tragic decisions would turn their little fun-filled field trip into a disaster that would change their lives forever. What you're about to hear is a tragic story that shocked an entire nation, left many questioning how things went so horribly wrong, and even inspired a national blockbuster movie in a flash. Today, we share the facts of that fateful day, honoring those who lost their lives and the families forever impacted. Parents had eagerly sent their children on this trip, trusting the school's leadership. But what was supposed to be a day of learning would soon slowly turn into every parent's worst nightmare. A tragedy that would become the worst outdoor recreation disaster to ever happen in New Zealand. As always, viewer discretion is advised. It's hard to know where to begin telling the story. But to understand how things went so horribly wrong, we have to go back a few months before this event, when Jody Sullivan, the instructor leading the ill-fated trip, first joined the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuit Center, OPC. Jody started her journey as an outdoor instructor at the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuit Center at OPC in January 2008, just months before the tragedy. She had completed a 12-week outdoor educator's course, designed to fast-track individuals into becoming outdoor instructors. Jody was passionate about outdoor education, but was still new to the field. In the world of outdoor education, new instructors like Jody are typically given a mentor for support throughout this sort of journey, but she never received the guidance she desperately needed. Although she had theoretical knowledge, this trip would be one of her first real challenges as a leader. Despite her inexperience, she was assigned to lead a group of 10 Elim Christian College students and one teacher on what was supposed to be a routine canyoning excursion through Mangatepopo Gorge. On the morning of April 15, 2008, a group of 40 students, all in grade 12, from Elim Christian College arrived at the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuit Center, OPC, for an exciting, character-building outdoor adventure. The outdoor education program was designed to teach leadership, resilience, and teamwork in challenging environments. The Mangatepopo Gorge trip was the highlight of their camp, a chance to test their limits and bond as a team. The students split into several smaller groups, each led by an OPC instructor, as they set out on different activities for the day. One of these groups, made up of 10 students and accompanied by a teacher, was assigned to Jody Sullivan to lead them on a canyoning excursion through Mangatepopo Gorge. This group, which was full of eager students ready for adventure, included Tara Gregory, a 16-year-old with a quick wit and an adventurous spirit who had texted her mother before the trip, jokingly saying, "Bye-bye, Mummy." She handed over her cell phone because phones were not allowed on the trip. Natasha Bray, another student known for her bright personality, was in this group and excited for the challenge ahead, while her friend Portia McPhail looked forward to the thrill of the canyoning experience. Alongside them were Floyd Fernandez, a bold and curious student, and Anthony Mulder, always up for a challenge. Then there was also Juan Tom Shu, a determined student who had cerebral palsy, but never let it stop him from participating in every activity. Leading the group was their teacher, Anthony McLean, a respected and well-loved figure who had taken many students on similar trips before. The plan was simple. The group would follow a well-established route through the Mangatepopo Gorge while practicing their canyoning skills along the way. Their goal was to reach the halfway point, engage in team-building exercises, and then make their way back before the weather changed. But the weather that morning was already proving to be a major concern. Heavy rain had started to fall, and the forecast warned of worsening conditions throughout the day. The Mangatepopo Gorge, like many others, is a steep, narrow valley carved out by years of flowing water. In normal conditions, the Mangatepopo Gorge is a stunning landscape. Its rock walls rise high above the streams, and this makes it a perfect, serene environment for canyoning, hiking, and exploration. Gorges are beautiful, but can be dangerous during the rain. Their towering walls create a funnel for any water entering the area, meaning rainwater or snowmelt from miles away can channel into the gorge, raising water levels quickly and dramatically. What looks like a gentle stream can rapidly turn into a powerful, fast-moving torrent when water is forced through the narrow confines of the gorge. The strong current can easily sweep away anything or anyone in its path. And because the walls of the gorge are so steep, there's little room to climb to safety or escape if the water rises suddenly. On that fateful day in April 2008, when Jody Sullivan and her group of students reached the halfway point of the gorge, the weather, which had been bad all day, took a turn for the worse. The rainfall, which had started earlier in the day, was steadily increasing. Although the stream still appeared manageable, the water levels were rising dangerously fast. What Jody and her group didn't know was that upstream water was accumulating, creating the perfect conditions for a flash flood. Despite what you might think, the risk of heavy rain and rising water levels wasn't a surprise. At the 8 a.m. staff meeting that morning, the field manager for the OPC Center, Carrie Palmer, had already expressed concerns. The forecast called for heavy rain, and Palmer had advised instructors to stay cautious. Jody had discussed her plan with Palmer, but the final call on whether to proceed had been left to her. Palmer didn't stop the trip from going forward, and Jody, relying on her limited experience, believed they could handle it. After all, the students were well prepared and eager to complete the challenge. Why did Jody and Palmer think they could handle it? Perhaps it was because the rain started slowly, or maybe it was a combination of overconfidence and inexperience. But a more plausible reason is that she thought she could handle it because that was how she was taught. That was OPC's culture. The center had a reputation for pushing through difficult conditions, often following the mantra of rain or shine. This attitude was ingrained in the culture, where students were expected to face challenges head-on as part of their outdoor education. OPC prided itself on offering high-adventure activities that taught resilience and leadership in tough, unpredictable environments. It was common for instructors to make judgment calls based on personal experience rather than strict safety protocols. But there were deeper issues at play. By 2008, OPC was struggling with what's known in administrative terms as staff drift. Instructors were quitting frequently, and this led to high turnover and a lack of institutional memory. New instructors, like Jody, were often left to learn on the job, without the guidance or mentorship that more experienced staff could have provided. This meant that critical safety lessons weren't being passed down to new recruits. More experienced instructors would have likely turned back, but OPC's high staff turnover meant Jody wasn't equipped with the institutional knowledge to understand just how deadly the gorge could become during a storm. She wasn't even aware of a previous fatal accident in this same gorge years earlier. To make matters worse, Jody wasn't the only one operating under pressure. The OPC field manager, Carrie Palmer, had his own set of challenges. There was increasing pressure to continue delivering high-adventure programs, despite having fewer experienced instructors on staff. The center's operations were stretched thin, with field manager Carrie Palmer overseeing multiple groups by himself. The risk-it-all culture, high turnover, and gaps in staff knowledge all led to a situation where an instructor with limited experience was making decisions that would soon have disastrous consequences. By midday on April 15, 2008, Jody Sullivan and her group were inside Mangatepopo Gorge. Even though the rain showed no signs of letting up, she believed it was a manageable and controlled canyoning excursion. At around 1 p.m., Jody and her group reached the dam at the bottom of the gorge. From their viewpoint, the water level had risen slightly but flowed clearly, which was a misleading sign that suggested that they were safe to continue. Jody had communicated with Carrie Palmer by radio just before reaching the dam. Palmer, while expressing his concerns about rising water levels, had advised her to assess the situation once they reached the gorge. He was uneasy about the weather, but trusted Jody's judgment. She, in turn, decided that they could still proceed, intending to only go part way into the gorge before engaging the students in team-building exercises. However, by the time they started their descent deeper into the gorge, the situation was becoming more precarious. What Jody and the group didn't realize was that upstream water was building rapidly. The narrow walls of Mangatepopo Gorge were acting like a funnel, channeling rainwater from the surrounding mountains straight into the stream, transforming it into a ticking time bomb. At around 2 p.m., the group had made it to what is known as the halfway ledge, a common turnaround point for gorge trips. This was a narrow rock formation just above the stream, and it was a place where instructors often paused to assess the situation before heading back. The students were still in high spirits, some even laughing, unaware that the water levels around them were slowly rising. But Jody sensed the change. The once steady current was now faster, and the sound of rushing water was becoming more pronounced. It was at this point that the first real signs of danger began to emerge. The stream, which had been ankle-deep when they entered the gorge, was noticeably higher, nearing their calves. The students started to notice the difference too, as what had once been a gentle stream had turned into a fast-moving current. Some began to feel uneasy, looking at Jody for reassurance. The rain was also becoming heavier, and the once manageable drizzle was quickly evolving into a downpour. Half an hour later, the water levels began to rise even faster. The clear stream they had entered earlier was turning muddy, a warning sign that the current was picking up debris from upstream. Jody knew they were at a critical phase. They were halfway through the gorge with a difficult decision to make: turn back or wait it out on the ledge. As they huddled on the narrow ledge, the students were growing cold and tired. The rising water was quickly limiting their options. Jody, while relying on her training and limited experience, decided to pause and reassess. She was caught in a dilemma. Staying here on the ledge posed its own risks, but attempting to lead the group back through the now turbulent waters could be even more dangerous. In her mind, waiting out the storm might be the best option. Meanwhile, Carrie Palmer, who had grown increasingly concerned about the weather, had driven down to the dam to check the water levels. He found the river flowing strongly, but assumed that Jody and her group had taken shelter. He was completely unaware that they were now trapped in the very gorge he feared would become dangerous. "I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they communicate?" Unfortunately, communication was limited. Once Jody and her group entered the gorge, radio contact was lost, and Palmer had no way of knowing exactly where they were or how bad the situation had become. As Jody stood on the ledge with her group, the situation continued to get worse. The rain was relentlessly feeding into the stream. What had been a knee-deep current was now nearing their thighs, and the force of the water was making it difficult for the students to stand still without holding on to each other or the rock wall. The once thrilling adventure had shifted into something far more sinister, and Jody could feel the weight of her responsibility growing heavier with each passing minute. By 3 p.m., the water had turned even darker, and the sound of the rushing water was louder. The gorge, which had earlier felt serene and majestic, turned into a trap. Jody knew they couldn't stay there much longer. Hypothermia was becoming a real threat, with the cold water soaking through the students' wetsuits, and the fast-moving current making it impossible to remain where they were. She gathered the group and made the difficult decision to move. The plan was to lead the students downstream toward the exit, but the reality of their situation made this far more dangerous than she could have anticipated. The ledge they were on was just 100 feet from the exit point of the gorge. It sounds like a seemingly short distance if you're walking it, not swimming it while fighting the strong current. Jody had a plan that required precision and coordination. She intended to use a throw bag, which was a rope attached to a weighted bag that would be thrown across the stream to create a lifeline for the students. The idea was to throw the rope, anchor it securely on the opposite side, and help each student navigate the raging currents one by one. Jody knew that some students were better swimmers than others. To address this, she paired the better swimmers with the weaker ones, tying them together with ropes. The idea was that the stronger student could support the weaker, and this would provide additional stability as they crossed the torrent. This method would also allow Jody to manage the crossings in pairs, speeding up the process while increasing their chances of survival. The first step in her plan was for Jody herself to cross the stream with Ashley Smith, one of the stronger students. This was important because once on the other side, Jody could anchor herself, throw the rope back across the water, and help guide the others to safety. With Jody and Ashley in place, the rest of the group would follow, grab onto the rope, and use it as a lifeline to navigate through the fast-moving water. The first part of the plan went perfectly. The second part, however, showed the flaw in Jody's plan. The problem wasn't the mechanics of the throw bag or the idea of pairing the students. It was the current itself. Jody had underestimated the sheer force of the water. What had been a manageable stream earlier in the day was now a raging torrent. The students waiting on the ledge were not just battling the rising water, but also the intense cold and fatigue which had begun to impair their strength and coordination. Another critical flaw was timing. No one in the group had a watch, making it impossible to track the planned 5-minute gaps between crossings. The rising panic among the students only made this worse, as some were eager to go while others hesitated, unsure of their ability to cross safely. The situation required precision, but the chaotic conditions made precision impossible. The biggest flaw, however, was the lack of proper anchoring. Although Jody was able to secure herself on the opposite bank, there was nothing solid enough to provide the kind of stability needed to hold the rope firmly in place. As a result, the rope was constantly shifting, making it difficult for the students to hold on and use it as a stable guide. The strength of the current was also much greater than Jody had anticipated. Even with the rope in place, the students would have to fight against the water's overwhelming force. The idea of pairing stronger swimmers with weaker ones worked in theory, but in reality, the weaker swimmers were being dragged down by the current, and even the stronger ones were struggling to maintain their grip on the rope. Ultimately, Jody's plan relied on the assumption that the current wouldn't intensify to such an extent that it would overpower the group. But the floodwaters were merciless, and what was supposed to be their lifeline quickly turned into another obstacle. One by one, the students tried to make their way across. Kish Proctor, one of the first to attempt the crossing, was unable to hold onto the rope. In the chaos, he was swept over the dam, but was miraculously rescued later, alive. Peter Shee, the next student, managed to grab the rope and make it across safely. But for others, the story would not end the same way. Portia McPhail, Natasha Bray, and Tara Gregory, unable to catch the rope, were swept over the dam by the force of the water. Their friends watched helplessly from the ledge as they disappeared into the torrent. Moments later, Floyd Fernandez and Anthony Mulder, who had been tied together in an attempt to help each other, were also carried over the dam, unable to withstand the power of the current. As the number of missing students grew, the remaining members of the group could do nothing but cling to the rocks, hoping that help or a miracle would arrive. The air was thick with desperation, and Jody, still on the other side of the stream, was powerless to stop the unfolding disaster. By the time the torrent finally subsided, 6 students and their teacher, Anthony McLean, had been swept away. Anthony, who had heroically tied himself to Juan Tom Shu in an attempt to save the student, had managed to catch the rope at first, but the force of the water was too much and both were lost to the flood. The hours that followed the disaster were a blur of panic, confusion, and heartbreak. Emergency services were immediately notified, and search and rescue operations were launched. News of the tragedy quickly spread, and parents, teachers, and the local community held their breath, hoping for a miracle. But as the hours dragged on, the devastating reality began to sink in. Rescue teams reached the scene, finding those who had survived huddled on the ledge, cold, exhausted, and in shock. Some of the students, like Kish Proctor, had narrowly escaped death, while others were simply lucky to have survived the powerful current. But for the families of those who hadn't returned, the news was unbearable. 6 students and 1 teacher had been lost, swept away by the floodwaters. As the nation grieved, questions immediately arose. How could something like this happen? How did a school trip to promote teamwork and leadership turn into a national tragedy? And more importantly, could it have been prevented? In the weeks that followed, an investigation was launched into the events leading up to the Mangatepopo Gorge disaster. The findings were shocking. revealing a series of systemic failures at the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuit Center, OPC. That explained why many instructors were quitting the center. The tragedy wasn't simply the result of a sudden flash flood, but more of a culmination of poor decision-making, inadequate training, and a flawed safety culture. The coroner's inquiry found that the center had failed in several critical areas. Jody Sullivan, though passionate and well-intentioned, had not been properly equipped for the situation she faced. She had received limited training, lacked a mentor, and had been forced to make life-or-death decisions without the necessary experience. OPC's high turnover rate meant that institutional knowledge about the risks of the gorge, including previous incidents of flooding, had not been passed down to newer staff. Even more damning were the reports of safety oversight at the center. The rain-or-shine mentality that had been ingrained into OPC's culture had created an environment where pushing through difficult conditions was seen as part of the challenge. There was also a lack of clear communication between field managers and instructors. Jody was left to make the final decision despite the warning signs of bad weather. Perhaps one of the most tragic revelations was that this disaster could have been avoided. The inquiry noted that had the group remained on the ledge for just another hour, the waters would have receded. But with no way of knowing this, Jody had made the fateful decision to move, setting off a chain of events that led to the loss of 7 lives. The families of the victims were devastated, but they were also determined to seek accountability. Tara Gregory's mother, Catherine Linnan, was one of the most vocal advocates for change. She spoke openly about the warning signs she had ignored when Tara jokingly texted her, "Bye-bye, Mummy," before handing in her phone. That moment, which had seemed harmless at the time, haunted her in the aftermath of the tragedy. As the inquiry progressed, it became clear that OPC was not an isolated case. The outdoor education sector as a whole was under scrutiny, with many questioning the safety standards and oversight in place for such high-risk activities. Reports revealed that OPC had experienced other near misses and even fatalities in the past, but these incidents were not widely known or addressed within the organization. In the aftermath of the Mangatepopo disaster, the OPC Center was fined $480,000 for health and safety breaches. The principal of Elim Christian College, Murray Burton, was awarded a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for his leadership in guiding the school community through such a traumatic event. But for the families who had lost their children, no amount of compensation or recognition could fill the void left behind. The tragedy of the Mangatepopo Gorge disaster left an indelible mark on New Zealand. It sparked widespread changes in the outdoor education industry. With stricter safety protocols and clearer lines of communication being implemented across the sector. The coroner's report made nearly 200 recommendations to prevent future tragedies, many of which were adopted by outdoor education providers nationwide. For the survivors, the memories of that day remain etched in their minds. The sound of the rushing water, the feeling of helplessness, and the loss of their friends are experiences they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And for the families of those who were lost, the pain of that day will never truly fade. In the end, the Mangatepopo Gorge disaster serves as a heartbreaking reminder of the dangers that can arise when we underestimate the power of nature and overestimate our ability to control it. While the tragedy cannot be undone, the lessons learned from it have undoubtedly made outdoor education in New Zealand safer for future generations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.